This is Georgina Rose, and welcome to the Postmodern Iconoclast, a podcast that helps you destroy and break the false icons and idols of the digital age in search of a more authentic, esoteric spirituality. On this podcast, we discuss ideology, esoterica, and everything on the fringes of mysticism, religion, and related topics. Welcome to the show. This is your host, Georgina Rose, and welcome back to the Postmodern Iconoclast. In this episode, we are going to be discussing Christian mysticism. I've talked a lot about esotericism, mysticism, philosophy on this show, but this is a topic that I've never delved into in a full episode format, touched on it briefly, and so I wanted to invite someone onto the show who knows about this topic, has experience, practice, and practices in this. So, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am Anjali Rose. I am a mystic, a generational Christian mystic on both sides of my family, a teacher of mysticism, a diviner, and a spiritual advisor.
Perfect. And just for my audience, we had a little bit of a hiccup with recording, so if the sound's a little off, that's what's going on. But just to break into it, in, I guess, the most broad way to start, what exactly is Christian mysticism?
Mysticism in general is seen throughout all of religious traditions throughout the world. But Christian mysticism, I guess, is unique in the fact that Christianity as a whole is rooted in mysticism. So Christ himself was a mystic. Mostly at least every story of any saint that I've ever read, I'm sure there's exceptions, but a lot of the saints are mystics themselves, and anything that has come from after that isn't mysticism that comes out of Christianity is actually not the traditional way it started. So to define what mysticism is in general, there are three kind of characteristics that would define what a mystical experience is. And so a mystic is someone who experiences mystical experiences or mystical phenomenon. You can't really choose to be a mystic. It is something that just chooses you. And you can definitely go through spiritual practices and have a devotional practice to God and do all of the things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you will have a mystical experience. So mystics are people who are having mystical experiences, which this means. So the first characteristic is you're having direct and intimate experiences with God themselves, with the divine. It doesn't matter, what you call the divine spirit, God, the divine mother, whatever. So it is a direct relationship with God. The second characteristic would be this ecstasy. So not in the sense where you're kind of like losing control of your body or anything like that, but it is an ecstatic experience in the way that it is transcending our egoic self and our sense of I. So you might even, a mystic, when they're having this experience, they might lose all sense of space and time. They are, no longer even experiencing relative time and space, and they are merged into that divinity. So that's the second characteristic. The third characteristic is noesis, which is different from gnosis. Noesis, which is spelled Noesis, or the word is also noetic, like having a noetic experience. And this experience is a direct form of knowing. So it's a direct transmission from God. And it's something that sometimes you can't explain, you can't put into words. And when the mystic does try to explain, it's very poetic. And, it's the language of God, which is usually very artistic, very beautiful. God is all loving. God is beauty. God is love. So that's the language that kind of comes out of these mystics. And we see there's countless mystics the Christian mystics who have these experiences, and then afterwards they can't stop quoting scripture, and they're very honey tongued and they become very charismatic and just radiant in this joy and this bliss. And also, this noesis purifies you. So, which is different from, when people have, transcendental or etheric experiences, and it can make them more kind of greedy or lustful, or they, it boosts their ego and they think they're the second coming of Christ. It actually amplifies their lower nature. That's not considered a authentic mystical experience, because an authentic mystical experience is um, a direct communion with God. So God purifies us. So after this experience, you will feel more one with other people. You become more humbled, and you let go of your sense of ego. You can have like an egoic death as well. And so you become more virtuous as a result of this experience. And you see other people and beings as no different from yourself. And so you wouldn't put yourself above these other people. And we can see this in the example of Jesus Christ himself. He never put himself above other people. He was always hanging out with all kinds of people of society that were oppressed, or people who were demonized in society, and speaking highly of the homeless. Blessed are are not the homeless, but the poor. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. But he never. It wasn't this like feeling sorry for people or trying to be charitable or like their savior or anything. He just saw them as equal with himself. And we see this within the stories of saints, where they aren't, putting themselves above other people and looking down on others. It's this very humble, down to earth. Actually, you would think that mystics would be like, out of their body and ungrounded, but they're actually very down to earth, grounded people, because they see you for your true nature, which is God, and they are living in that space of God.
One specific thing you said that stood out that I found really interesting is this idea of an inauthentic mystic experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do you think spurs those? Because I definitely have seen cases where people have had a mystic experience and it's sort of given that characteristic that you were describing, and I've never quite heard it phrased that way. So how would you like decipher those differences, and what do you think causes these inauthentic experiences?
Well, I think they they could very well be authentic, actually, but the lens that they're viewing through is tainted in some way. So they could be suffering from mental illness. That's one thing. And so when we are suffering from mental illness, from a scientific perspective, like usually, not always, but a lot of mental illness comes from like PTSD or trauma or something like that. And so our reptilian brain, when we've been traumatized, is activated. And so our reptilian brain brings out our lower nature. So they could very well be having a mystical experience, but the way that they're perceiving it actually boosts that lower nature, that reptilian part of their brain. Also, when people do, things like drugs for mystical experiences, or they induce mystical experiences, um, that can occur. And there's people that have very authentic mystical experiences by taking substances, and it purifies them. They have an ego death, all of that. But it's taking substances is not the same as just having a spontaneous mystical experience.
I have a similar view on it. I've been relatively critical of entheogen use for spiritual stuff because this is the thing. I think that there are times when that can be a gateway, but I think often when people really rely on entheogens and drugs for spiritual experiences, it becomes this crutch. And I
Yeah.
completely agree with you on that. I think that, those experiences, they exist. I've met people who've had really profound experiences with that stuff. So it's not all bad, but I do think it can become a crutch, and I do think that it's really important if you want to take the path seriously to be able to have mystic experiences without the use of a drug, right? I found that
Mhm.
my most profound spiritual experiences have been when I was, sober. So I completely agree with you there.
Yeah, and the thing is that I guess kind of like what I was getting to is that to take a substance is not sustainable because we can definitely have a mystical experience. And same thing with someone who's suffering from mental illness, by the way. Like they can have an experience that actually like can help to heal that, but it's not always the case. But also when someone's taking a substance, and they maybe at one time have this like very transcendental experience and it really is healing and beautiful and all this, and then they're always kind of chasing the dragon, so they always need to have that herb or eat those mushrooms or all of that, and you can't really um, you can't really try to have that experience again. It's just God chooses you to have that experience. And sometimes God guides us to take a substance to commune with them. And but in all the traditions, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, there is a talk of taking herbs to help, induce a meditative state or spiritual experiences. But in all the spiritual traditions, including that one, we don't want to, like, that's not the end goal. We want to get to a place where we're not relying on that, because again, it's not sustainable. It's not something, because then we're actually like worshiping the drug rather than God. We're trying to go through the middleman, and if we don't have that, then we think that we can't have an experience like that, which isn't the case. Also, I would say, back to your original question with inauthentic experiences, is there, when we have a mystical or etheric kind of experience, um, and like I said earlier, a genuine mystical experience that we're having an experience with a divine source is purifying. And if you're having a mystical experience with a non-divine source or a lower kind of entity, that can also make you have a bad experience, or an experience that actually makes all those parts of your lower nature come out, more greedy, more lustful, et cetera, et cetera. And so yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to ask you is you've been mentioning that mystic experiences in the Christian tradition come from God, but I know that a lot of Christian traditions that lean to the mystical side are traditions of Christianity that incorporate heavy use of like the saints and Mary, and I was wondering like if you're using these spirits, are they still valid mystical experiences? I guess it could be, because I know that the phrase used in Christianity is like intercession, which is not the same as, solely using that spirit, right? You're using them to intercede on behalf of God. But like, how did that play in? Are those also like authentic experiences, and can those, spur experiences?
Yeah, absolutely, because they are still embodying the Holy Spirit. The difference between Mother Mary and a saint and then Jesus Christ himself is Jesus Christ is considered an incarnation of God. So he is God himself. And whereas a saint is just a normal person like you and me, but they've been purified by this eternal spirit. They're not an actual incarnation of God. Same thing with Mary. She's not considered, traditionally, she's not considered an incarnation of the Divine Mother or anything like that. So, but they are still embodying that purifying Holy Spirit energy.
Interesting you separated, if I heard you right, the Divine
Mhm.
Mother from Mary. What's the difference between the two? Because I've never really seen them sort of broken and apart.
Well, I guess I kind of would use them interchangeably, actually. The Divine Mother does refer more to like a goddess form of God, but I know that I don't know if you were still going to ask me questions about Mother Mary and all of that, and or the Divine Feminine within Christianity, but actually, Mother Mary is an icon, and she has been Christianity in general, but especially the iconography of Mother Mary is universal to the entire world, and And a lot of that has to do with these goddesses, these ancient goddesses that would be considered pagan goddesses, or indigenous goddesses from like the Americas. They've been syncretized with Mother Mary. So actually, these goddesses, these divine mother deities, actually work through Mother Mary, because Christianity took over the world, kind of colonized everything, didn't allow indigenous people to practice their traditions anymore. So those people still yearning for their divine mother deities, those goddesses actually came through, apparitions and things like this. Like, one of the most popular and famous ones is Our Lady of Guadalupe. She's a syncretism from the Aztec mother goddess, Tenochtitlan. And even in her iconography, she has the sun, the solar rays behind her, and she is clothed in this blue veil with the yellow stars on it. That's actually part of the iconography of Tenochtitlan. And same thing, there's Orishas, which are the Yoruban tradition from Africa, the enslaved people who were brought over from Africa into the Caribbean, into Brazil, South America. They worship their Orisha mother deities through some of the Mother Mary apparitions. And actually, those specific Mother Mary apparitions were actually originally Black Madonnas as well. And a lot of the Southern European traditions, or like the ancient traditions, a lot of the temples to these goddesses were desecrated at one point when Christianity took over, and in their place became these shrines to the Mother Mary, but more specifically, they were Black Madonnas originally, and a lot of the temples were like temples to Mother Goddess Isis. And like throughout Rome and throughout the Mediterranean as a whole, she was very popular, well-known universal goddess throughout the ancient world. And same thing with Sybil, the goddess Sybil, who comes from what is now modern day Turkey. She had temples that were desecrated in the Mediterranean, and then these Black Madonna shrines came to be. And so these goddesses are working through the imagery, I guess, of Mother Mary. So she, in a sense, is like a divine mother. And that's why I kind of was like, traditionally, she's not considered the divine mother within Christianity and Catholicism and everything, even though within Catholicism, she is very, there's Marianology and all of that.
Can you explain what a Black Madonna is for the unfamiliar?
Okay, so the people who really know about the Black Madonna and study these shrines, they regard the first Black Madonna as being Mother Goddess Aset, or we know her as Goddess Isis, from the Greek pantheon. And there are many, many correlations between what came to be as the Christian tradition and the ancient mystery schools of ancient Egypt, actually. And like I said earlier, Goddess Isis was the most popular goddess within the Mediterranean. And so these Black Madonnas, okay, so Mother Isis was almost always depicted dark brown or black, and she is considered a primordial goddess. So she is a goddess of the earth. And so these Black Madonnas, same thing with Sybil. The goddess Sybil was one. There's more, they're kind of like eluding me right now, but there's more pagan goddesses that were like these primordial, undomesticated. Actually, Mother Isis was more domesticated, like compared to Hathor, which was her predecessor within the ancient Egyptian pantheon. But still, compared to like Mother Mary, she's undomesticated. She's a goddess of the earth. And so these Black Madonnas, it's actually very mysterious. I actually did a whole presentation on it, and I think it's actually online. but I'm not sure. It's on my friend Nish's YouTube channel, I believe, Nish the Fish. But so it's very mysterious. They don't really know where these Black Madonnas came from. They just said like these paintings came from the East. So they obviously came from the Levant. It's like it represents this primordial mother archetype that is nurturing, that is connected to the earth, that isn't just Mother Mary full of grace. She is a real woman, you know, within what we see now, like especially in the West, in America, we see this feminine archetype. The only really like feminine archetype that we have is Mother Mary, full of grace, the Virgin Mary, and that's a beautiful archetype. That is definitely part of the feminine archetype. But there's so much more to the you know, divine feminine that has been hidden through Mother Mary or concealed from us. And like even if we look at her symbology, and if we look at the way that Mother Mary is depicted from a metaphysical, you know, perspective, she's all veiled and she's almost always has her eyes closed and she's looking down like meditative and her hands are in prayer. She's like kind of closed and asleep. And that to me, for sure, really is this message that there is something being hidden. We've been you know, led astray almost from the full spectrum of what the divine feminine archetype really is. And it has been through Christianity, through at least through not how it started out, not how it was ever meant to be. Early Christianity was much different from what it became when it became a state religion within these empires.
So when you're talking about like the divine feminine, you know, being hidden, and you know how early Christianity is very different from what Christianity became, do you feel that sometimes like mysticism and what mystics are looking for sort of run against what the modern church is doing or is headed? Do they like have tension between each other at any point?
Yes, definitely. Well, in the beginning of the Christian movement, it was illegal to be Christian. That's how threatening Christ and his message was to these empires, basically. So every single one of the apostles, except for John, were killed for being, you know, loyal to Christ and his teachings, and for teaching his teachings. We have lots of stories of these early Christian martyrs, same thing. But when you read all their stories, there is a complete lack of fear as they are being persecuted. They are completely empowered. They are completely spiritually liberated. There's no fear, guilt, or shame. So that's why it was illegal for like 300 to 400 years. So what I believe, and I know a lot of people believe this, not just me, but what it seems like happened is that these empires could not control these people that were becoming liberated, that were almost like fanatical over Christ. They would hear just upon hearing his teachings and stories, they would become free. They would all of a sudden just be in love. And, you know, the things of the world didn't have them in bondage anymore. And so how can you control people that are free, you know? And this was, you know, in the midst of, in the Vedic calendar, we're still in the Kali Yuga, so we're in an Iron Age. There has been a devolution in consciousness. And now, as we see, you know, if you just look over the past hundreds of years, it's not hard to notice that, you know, we are rising in consciousness again. The Kali Yuga is over. Hearts are opening. There's this, you know, what they call Christ consciousness that is rising within all of us. And there's more humane things happening for people everywhere. And so during this dark age or this Iron Age, they, you know, in an Iron Age, there is a focus on materialism and all of our lower nature. So greed, lust, ego, all of that. And so same thing with these empires. And so if people are becoming pure and free, how can they control them? So they're like, well, let's take this thing that people are obsessed with and create our own system of it. And that's what these empires really did. And so they created a system, and they kind of perverted the actual teachings of Christ and made his teachings about hell and heaven into literal things that happen after death. And there's actually nowhere in the New Testament anywhere whatsoever that where Christ verbatim says you will go to heaven or hell after death. He just says these as kind of metaphors or allegory to, like, hell is like suffering while we're alive, and we can actually live in the kingdom of heaven if we follow the way to God, basically. And sin, the word sin comes from the Hebrew word hata, I think, and the Greek word hamartia, which means to miss the mark. So that's what the word sin means. So to miss the mark is to be straight away from God. So when we're acting in our lower nature, these sinful ways, it's not that we should be punished and this is bad, and it's just like, oh no, I'm just doing these things that are actually leading me astray from God, and I can actually change that at any moment and make a different decision. It shouldn't be this like doom and gloom, like fear, guilt, and shame thing. It's just, and we see this through all the traditions, like the Buddha, he taught all about suffering, and he's like, life is suffering. Here's an eightfold path to overcome suffering, because to be in a body is to suffer, basically. And that's what Jesus Christ taught. This, you will be subject to the hellfire if you don't live in this, virtuous way, basically, or you're not forgiving and all of this, because, that means to suffer. If we're constantly judging and condemning others, that doesn't help us. It doesn't make us, become more enlightened or spiritually liberated. So yeah, there's definitely a difference between how it started and where it is now. And I don't think, like how you phrased it, like where it's headed, I don't think it's necessarily like, I think it's done heading anywhere. I think it's just like here to stay the way it is, and it's not going to evolve into anything more, unless, of course, there's always like new churches coming out, but there's like thousands of denominations of Christianity at this point, literally. So of course there's always going to be like these new churches, but nothing on the scale of like the Catholic Church. Catholicism is very big. The monastic, forms of Christianity, which is the orthodox churches, and Catholicism. So there's not going to be anything like that, because people are kind of done with that dogmatic religion. Again, we are coming into an ascension spiritually as a whole entire civilization. And so people can see through that now, through this control, and they are finding Jesus Christ and his teachings directly, like what we were talking about earlier. These mystical experiences are dawning upon people. There recently was, over the summer, the man who started and the leader of the Satanic Church in South Africa had a Jesus Christ awakening, basically. And it wasn't because he was going to church or anything like that. His story's up online. You can totally watch all his videos and stuff. It's really quite beautiful, in my opinion. And he just had direct experiences with Jesus Christ, felt his love when he, of course, denied it his whole life. And of course, and that's totally right. That's totally valid that people would, not want anything to do with Jesus Christ, with the way that it has been exploited and used to actually harm people around the world. And so, and that's, yeah, and that's a whole other thing. But so it's actually led people astray from his actual teachings. If you read the Bible, even the edited Bible that still exists today, his teachings are just very, mystical and very liberating and beautiful. And, you know, they don't really teach that. The church kind of doesn't really teach that, which is kind of interesting. And so to really have a personal experience with Jesus Christ, you kind of have to go on your own at this point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned, I mean, there are a million denominations of Christianity, right? Are
Yeah.
there any denominations that you think are like better for people into mysticism? Because they are just so different. Or do you think it's better to just go independent?
Okay, this is totally my opinion, but I would say honestly no. And I have explored the different ones, and there's ones that are definitely more rooted in the traditional aspect, like the Orthodox churches, but it's still an Orthodox religion. At the end of the day, it still is dehumanizing to certain groups and communities of people. It Yeah, it's just, it doesn't, it misses the mark. It doesn't have, it hasn't evolved. It's antiquated still. It's very beautiful. You go to these churches and it feels very, it feels like you're back in like a different time period. Like like you are really in how it started. If in the ancient world, they had all these cults, right? These cults to these goddesses and gods, and which, today that's a dirty word and that's a bad word to use, right? But like that just meant like a family of people that worship the same deity. And when you go, and at least this has been my experience when I go to an Orthodox church, it feels like the cult of Christ. It feels like you're going back into the ancient world, and the ritual and the whole liturgy that they do is working. Like I have had beautiful experiences with Jesus Christ. The only like real experiences that I've ever had in a church with Jesus Christ has been in an Orthodox church, and I can feel His presence there. Whereas when I go to a Catholic church or just like any other Christian church, and I was raised Catholic, by the way, but when I go to any other Catholic church or any Christianized church, I don't feel it. It's when they say the prayers and they read from the Bible, it's very robotic. It's very like monotonous. There's no flavor. You don't feel the Holy Spirit there. You really, at least in my experience, I have never felt that. And that's why I went astray from Christianity. I did not, like personally, did not jive with it. It has only been in my adult life that I have gone back to those traditions and rediscovered it through my ancestry and all of that. But yeah, if you really want to have a genuine experience with Christ, I would visit an Orthodox church, but I wouldn't say that you're going to get an authentic, like mystical, traditional, like true to what he actually taught thing. It still comes from the Byzantine Empire, which was just the eastern wing of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was raised around Episcopals and Mormons, and I've been to a number of churches. I personally am a perennialist. I'm not a Christian, but I have noticed. I do think the Orthodox they're my favorite Christian services I've ever been to. But yeah, it's not my path for a number of reasons. But a thing I wanted to kind of ask you about is, where do angels come in when it comes to Christian mysticism? Because I've read a number of like, Christian mystical texts over the years, and I've noticed the angels get brought up here and there. So where do you think it fits in?
Well, the idea of angels actually originates in Judaism, and of course, Christianity comes from Judaism. And in Judaism, there is the ninefold celestial hierarchy. So there is a ninefold order of angels. So at the very bottom is the guardian angel, and then I think from there it's the archangels, and then so on and so forth. The highest one is the seraphim, the six wings with the eyes all over their body. And that's the one that like guards heaven. And they're always like, especially in the Orthodox icons, there's a lot of imagery of those seraphims around Christ. And they're like the most powerful angels. They're like pure fire and just totally powerful. But so within the Christian tradition, like within the stories, Archangel Gabriel came to Mother Mary and gave her the message that, she was going to be having an incarnation of God, essentially. I'm paraphrasing and using my own language, but and then like we have Archangel Michael, which is this warrior angel, archangel as well. And so they fit in that way. And also when I went to catechism, so catechism is a night school for kids when you're in the Catholic Church, and they told us about having a guardian angel. And when I was young, like that was the thing within Catholicism that I loved, was learning about the angels and learning about Mother Mary. But the angels, like having a guardian angel, you pray to them and they're always with you. And I think they even gave us like a little pendant with like an angel on it. And so they are basically like the workers for God. So they're not God themselves. And you don't worship them like God, but like a saint, like they're called Saint Gabriel or Saint Michael. And you can invoke them like a saint. And actually, like when within Catholicism, you can invoke and pray to the saints and the angels and stuff, which is a lot like these like pagan traditions, or like these folk magic traditions where you are calling upon a deity or something, which is really funny. It just shows that that they were connected into paganism at one point, but of course they'll deny that to the end of time. But so you can invoke them, and I have personally had experiences with them. Like I said in the beginning, I come from Christian mystics. My family, my dad and Nona, were constantly throughout all my childhood, they can see angels. They would see them all the time. Like I within like Christian mystics, people who are, I guess, Christianized mystics, um they see angels and they interact with them, and they're very heavenly. I've heard of so many stories of people in an emergency situation calling on Michael, and all of a sudden like something happens, and they're saved. And like even in a car accident, like they'll be spinning out and all of a sudden like the car will stop and like be moved over or something. Like Archangel Michael, like that's one of his things, is that he's there like in an instant. As soon as you call upon him, he's immediately there. He's omnipresent. He can be, any of the angels are omnipresent. They can be anywhere at any time, multiple places, multiple times. And they work for you. And you can, I don't think you have to be Christian to call on them. Like I actually have never been baptized in my life. I was never baptized into the church or anything. And I have called upon them, and they have, done stuff for me. So definitely, like I don't know really like all of the ins and outs of, and I actually like one day really want to dive more into that. I don't know how it all works with the angels, but it's real. Like in my experience and in a lot of people's experience that I know throughout my whole life, they are real. And it is something, if you are feeling vulnerable in your life, if you feel like you want more protection in any way, that is something to look into, that you have support in the etheric realms, and that's what their job is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not a Christian, but I actually have, prayed to angels before and had things happen. I think that they are absolutely real. And the idea of angels does appear in other traditions outside of Christianity and Judaism. So there's certainly an idea that has captivated the world and the mystics of the world for an incredibly long time. You mentioned briefly the idea of folk traditions, and I hear online, I hear less now, but for a while people talked about this term folk Catholicism and like folk Christianity a lot. What exactly is that?
There's folk Catholic traditions within Europe, and then there's folk Catholic traditions, like what I just said about the enslaved African people. That would be considered folk Catholicism as well, using the saints and Mother Mary to invoke magic, basically, and to use them for their own benefit. And so in Europe, the tradition of Catholicism was so oppressive that people didn't traditionally go to church. And they were still connected to their, for lack of a better word, their pagan traditions, and or those like folk magic traditions in general, just like folk things, like, they just have like almost like superstitions or something, but it's deeper than a superstition. It's like you do this certain thing and you get this certain result. You light this candle and you do this rituals. And so they use, through the medium of Catholicism, so the saints and Mother Mary and Jesus Christ, they petition a saint or an angel or Mary, or they pray the rosary, and they use them in a way that is magical, and they invoke protection. And so it is actually kind of similar in a way that Catholics use it, but it's like deeper. It's more connected to the indigenous traditions of those areas, and it's all different too. Like in so like they do all different things based on the tradition. So like in the Americans, like Santeria uses folk Catholicism. Brujeria, which comes from Mexico, they use folk Catholicism. And then in Italy, it's called Benedicaria, and they use, but it's a little bit different based on just how they were raised and what they were, accustomed to in those parts of the world. So yeah, it's definitely a legit thing.
Makes sense. One thing that I was curious about is, to be a Christian mystic, do you need to be like really pious?
No. So pious means like to be very religious. So you would want to be, I guess the word is, you would want to be, on a path towards purity. So again, when we have these mystic experiences, it purifies us. So if we want to invoke mystical experiences or to connect to Christ or the angels or Mother Mary or whatever, we would want to be on a path of purity. And so what that would look like is, and this is throughout all the spiritual traditions in the world, there can't be true spirituality without some sort of renunciation. And renunciations should come naturally, though. It shouldn't, there's of course going to be people who can rigidly just like renounce the world and become a monk or a nun in a monastery or a convent and all of that. And there's monks and nuns in Hindu traditions. It's not just, specific to Catholicism or the monastic Christian orders. And so there's people, and those people have probably lived other lifetimes where they've purified a lot. So that's very easy for people to do. I really like the tantric form of like their view on renunciation, because it's very practical. And tantra, it doesn't just mean sex. Okay, like it's been totally perverted in the West and exploited and made into something else that it's not. So basically, all they do is they don't invalidate those, like addictions that we have, or if we have lust or greed or whatever, envy and all that. They say if those things fall away naturally, of course you could, you should renounce them. But if you can't, if it's not easy to let those things go, don't try to get rid of them, because resistance creates persistence. That's an Eckhart Tolle quote. And it's true. Like if we really try to like repress those parts of ourselves or get rid of it too soon, it's not sustainable. It's going to pop up, somewhere else. We can't just like repress those things within us. So what you would do is you continue doing those same things, but you just increase your devotion to God and your spiritual practices. And so then those things will naturally probably fall away. And that's kind of like the idea. And sometimes those things like lust or envy or greed, those things can actually help us on our spiritual path. Like if you see a very, pure saintly person who's reading scriptures all the time, and they're just like holy, and they're happy all the time, you're like, what's going on? And you actually feel like jealous of them, you feel envious. And normally, like, tradition would say, like, you need to not be envious, that is a sin, you need to be, compassionate or whatever. No, actually, that envy might actually make you start to want to see what they're doing and want to start reading the same scriptures that they're reading and doing the same practices. And even if it's coming from like a place of jealousy and envy, that gets you in the door of the practices. And then eventually you'll probably, if you're genuinely, seeking these things, those things might purify you. And eventually you'll see, like, oh, actually this person isn't any different from me. They're actually just a mirror, and we're the same. And then that envy and that jealousy will fall away. Or same thing with lust. If you have, if you're lusting after this really spiritual person, and you want to be like part of their spiritual community and see what's going on with them, and you join and all of that, and then later on you find out that they're married with 5 kids. At least it got you in the door. And maybe if you are genuinely trying, like, that is part of your path, then that lust will fall away, because then those practices are purifying you. It's purifying your heart. You're saying, like, oh no, that person has a family with children, like, that's not for me, I wouldn't want to hurt them. But again, that, like, those things that are considered sin, or those things that are lower nature, got you in the door. So we don't actually want to renounce those things right away. Just increase our devotion to God, increase your spiritual practices, and those things will likely naturally fall away on their own.
That makes sense. So my final question for you is what should people research, read, look into to learn more about Christian mysticism?
All the stories of all the saints, any story of any saint, really. If there's a saint that calls you, so Saint Francis is a beautiful mystic. He had so many mystical experiences. And one of my favorite saints, which isn't a very well-known saint, I don't think, but his name is Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. He had a lot of mystical experiences with Mother Mary, in France, I believe. And just really any of the stories of any of the saints, they just reading them they bring out this desire and to want to be like them, and to want to, like, devote time to God, to pray like them. And read the words of Christ in the Bible. He was a mystic. He is the spearhead of the tradition of mystics. um his his words are just, they are beautiful, and not only beautiful but liberating, and they can increase your devotion to God.
Thank you so much. So that's most of what I wanted to discuss. Where can people find you? Where's your corner on the internet?
You can find me right now on social media. My handle is Serpentine_Sprite, like the fairy. And I, the social media platforms that I'm on right now most predominantly are Instagram and TikTok. And I have link trees in the bio that you can go to if you want to book a reading with me or a spiritual advisor appointment. I have some things in the works to be opening up my own mystery school sometime in the near future. And so you can follow me on there, look out for that, to keep updated.
Thank you. So you can find me, the host of the show, Georgina Rose, on almost every social media platform under the sun. I make YouTube videos on YouTube under the name Dot Darling. I am on Twitter, TikTok, Telegram, Substack, Instagram. I'm everywhere. There is literally no platform that I am not on. I just exist everywhere. And if you want to support the show to enable me to keep making it and keep producing it, you can join the Patreon if you are a high enough tier and you do not decide to opt out. Because if you want to opt out, I respect your privacy. You can get your name shouted out every single episode. So without further ado, thank you so much for Mary, Ruben, Trevino, Shiraz, Emil, Neva, Emily, Lilith, Saranda, Jonah, Nauseated, and Lee. You keep the lights on. Thank you so much for continuing to help support this. And if you want to donate directly, I have a Venmo at dot darling. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you all in the next one. This has been the Postmodern Iconoclast, and I hope you're having a great day, afternoon, mid morning, mid evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. All right, bye.